Israel controls all of the access points to the Gaza Strip, save for one, the Philadelphia corridor at the Rafah border crossing, which is controlled by Egypt. The corridor is strictly regulated by Egypt, and any border crossers are reportedly subjected to bribes and lengthy bureaucratic harassment. However, despite all that, Israeli officials, including the Prime Minister, see the 8.7-mile stretch of land as a weak point in their war against Hamas. They believe that weapons and other contraband can be smuggled across that barrier into the Gaza Strip. And so Israel is warning Egypt they will take control of that border crossing one way or the other, which could include by military action. That is something they warned about over the weekend, and it's obviously a sore spot and a point of contention between the two nations. But that's not my point here tonight. My point here is to say, look at Egypt's border wall in the first place. Look how immense it is, how tall it is, covered in barbed wire, heavily armed and protected. The sight of this giant wall has not sparked a single peep of outcry or protest in the West by those who call our own porous border and its connected shelters akin to a concentration camp. When I saw this image of a border wall built by a nation allowed to say that it has foreign enemies and needs to protect its own people, it immediately gave me a sense of how futile this continual argument over our border in the U.S. really is. I know the left likes to pretend that building a border wall at our southern border wouldn't work and would just be a waste of money, but when has the left ever cared about wasting money or using taxpayer dollars to build something that won't work? That has never been their problem with it. They know border walls work and that they work all too well. That is the left's problem with it. They only sue Texas over the barriers and other impediments that do work, like their buoy system, their barbed wire, and now the approval for local law enforcement and judges to expel illegal immigrants from the state. That's why Democrats in Congress will give money to nations like Egypt or Jordan for their own border walls and border security, but never for our own border wall. We're never going to win the left on this debate because their minds are already settled. Joining us now to discuss is Brandon Gill, the Trump-endorsed Republican candidate for the 26th Congressional District of Texas. Brandon, thanks for being here tonight.
Kara, thanks for having me.
Great. So are you like me? Do you feel at least a little twinge of jealousy when you see how other nations like Egypt are allowed to have these giant, strong border walls, but for some reason we're not allowed to?
Right. Jealousy and frustration. Frustration that there seems to be at least consensus in Israel and in Egypt that national security is actually a priority and that they are sovereign nations who get to determine who comes in and out of their country. I think that it's refreshing to see a country that puts their own people first, because that's certainly not happening in America, especially under a Biden administration. Look, I think you hit the nail on the head in your monologue here. The reality is that we absolutely could have a border wall. We have the money to pay for it. We have the means to do it, the ability to do it. We just don't. And the reason I think it's really important to understand the reason that we don't. And you touched on some of them. I think there are two reasons. One is that the Democrats want to unleash chaos and destruction in our communities. They want to flood our citizens and our streets and our neighborhoods with drugs and crime, including some of the most dangerous narcotics that have ever been created. And to your point, also, they want to import a large number of Democrat voters. People, they are making the bet, will vote Democrat for life.
Oh, definitely. And of course, as we heard coming out of this weekend, Israeli officials in talks with Egyptian officials saying that they want control of that Rafah border crossing because they see it as a weak point to Israel's overall safety. It's the only access point that Israel doesn't have full control over when it comes to the Gaza Strip. And so when we're looking at the situation as it continues to unfold, this fight against terrorism and how it really is a global threat for us all, do you think one of the big takeaways, kind of drawing some of these parallels once again between what we see in the Middle East and what we see here at our own southern border, is that the massive terror attack, the massacre that occurred against Israeli civilians back in October, 1,500 or so victims, hundreds taken captive as well, that the fact was there was a massive failure in border security. Usually Israel is quite safe, right? Of course there are sadly terror attacks here and there, but they're usually much smaller in scale. But this was a massive border failure. It allowed for so many deaths. Is that really a huge lesson that we should draw when we look at our own southern border, as you were laying out the crime and everything else that we see flooding across that? It can happen here too.